Our guest today is a Democratic candidate for congressman in Illinois' 10th Congressional District. He began his career as a teacher, teaching English to high school students in Japan. Our guest today earned his master's degree in international economics and Japan studies from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. He is a business consultant and an adjunct professor at Northwestern University. Our guest today and his wife live in Wilmette with their 3 daughters. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the City Club of Chicago, Dan Seals. Dan?
Thank you, Jay, for that introduction, and thank you all for having me. I do want to probably give a little more detail just in my background because it does color my views. I also did my MBA at the University of Chicago, and I was a director at GE Capital before leaving to run for office. And of course, running for office is my own alternative lifestyle choice. It's been quite interesting. I actually got an email that came in from Tennessee, of all places. I haven't gotten an email like this before or since. It said in the subject heading, it said, "You are the best candidate ever." And my first thought was, that's got to be Mom, Who else would say that? But I opened it up, and sure enough, it said, "Dear Dan, you are the best candidate ever. I have been tracking your career for years. I have all of your albums." I said, well, wait a second. I kept reading it. It says, "I remember you from Seals and Crossed. You were great." So if you haven't heard of me, don't feel bad. She hadn't either. And so we're working very hard to certainly get out and meet new people. And I thank you for having me here today. I'm here to talk about the economy, which is one of the big issues that I'm hearing about and talking about as I'm going around and visiting with people in my district. And of course, this is a big issue across the country. And I think the story of our economy today is one of rising costs and a decreasing ability to pay. I want to read off a couple of statistics that compare where we were in January of 2001 with where we are today. Gas prices, we know, have more than doubled. Crude oil prices up more than 400%. The cost of health insurance, actually according to the New York Times, has superseded the cost of housing as the #1 expense that the average household must pay. The cost of prescription drugs up, electricity up, groceries up. The cost of tuition, be it at a state or private university, up. And the personal savings rate is, of course, down. And at the same time, all of those things are going up. And these really are some of the things that keep a middle-class family in the middle class. You're also seeing their ability to pay go down. So unemployment is up. The average household income down. You see that the number of Americans living in poverty has actually increased by almost 5 million Americans since 2001. So a lot of folks are feeling the pinch here, and there's a lot more that needs to be done to address them. I want to be very clear, though, in saying that not all of the causes come from government, or not all of the solutions, for that matter. Certainly, it's easy and fun to kick this administration. There's a lot that they have done that should be changed. The borrow and spend mentality that we have is not one that is serving our economy. But you could also point to previous administrations, our inability of the Clinton administration to actually deliver health care reform. We're still paying the price for that as well. But quite honestly, there are things that have nothing to do with government that are related to our current economy. We still have an abysmal time in building up a savings rate for individuals. We still tend to favor short-term gains over long-term ones. And we treated this housing market like it would never end, like you could never lose money. So these are things that you can't legislate away. There are things that government can do, but there are things that, frankly, other folks can do, and being more savvy, being more engaged to help ourselves out. I'm only going to talk about some of those government policies today, and then we'll open it up to your questions, because there are some places where we can help. And I'm going to break these into three categories. First, I'm going to talk about some of those costs that average Americans are facing. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the restructuring that I think our economy needs and some of the investments that we should be focusing on to make sure that we can continue to thrive in the future. And talking about some of those costs, let me start with health care. Forget for a moment that I think it's just immoral to have 47 million Americans without health care today. Let's just look at the cost of it. We spend more than twice the average of industrialized countries on health care. We take this huge portion of our GDP and put it firmly on top of the cost of our products when we are selling those products. We're the only country that does that, and as a consequence, we are at a competitive disadvantage versus other countries' products when we're selling overseas. Some of the stats that came out of Detroit is as much as 20% of the average car goes to paying for their employees' health care. You cannot thrive, you cannot grow economically with those economic conditions. It's just not sustainable. So we must have health care reform, and there are lots of competing plans out there, and there's hopefully going to be a wonderful debate in the next Congress about which one to pursue. But however it comes out, if we have a reform of the system, and I myself think that we need to at least have some basic form of health care that the government is providing for those who aren't satisfied with what they do have, you are ultimately going to bring costs down and decrease the amount of out-of-pocket that people are spending. It's a common sense reform, and we need to have it. It's long overdue, in my view. Education. I talked about the skyrocketing costs of education. Well, if you just look at our tax code, here's something else where the government has a role to fulfill here. We have 12 different tax incentives for higher education. Each one has different standards to meet. They apply to different components of education. Well, it's no surprise with 12 different incentives, an 80-page booklet, I think it's publication 980 or 970, that you have to navigate just to figure out which one to take. Well, it's no surprise that 27% of those who are eligible either take the wrong credit or take no credit at all. Why not simplify those 12 down into one tax credit? You would increase the take rate so that more people would actually get a benefit. You make it applicable to all components of education, so it's not just tuition, it's also room and board, your commute, books, etc. And why not make half of that refundable for those Americans who don't make enough to actually get a tax credit that they can take advantage of? That's a simple move that we can do just in simplifying the process that's going to get more people into higher education. And I'm going to come back to higher education before I'm through. Staying on this topic of taxes, I also think we need to simplify our entire tax code. Rahm Emanuel has put forth an idea that I think is a good one, which is to simplify the code, to take the 6 brackets and move it into 3, 15, 25, 35% brackets. The reason why this is so powerful is not just that it's going to take you less time to file your taxes, but also because the current complexity creates all manner of loopholes, and about $300 billion, according to the IRS, goes uncollected each year. That means people who are paying their taxes are paying more than their fair share because you're covering for those who aren't paying. Simplifying the code makes it harder to skirt the system, and that new money comes actually into the system, and you can lower taxes for everyone in doing so. The average household making $80,000 or less is going to get about a $1,500 reduction in the amount that they pay. A married couple would get about $3,000. And you're doing that without raising taxes, without increasing the deficit. It's just a common sense maneuver that we should be pursuing. Still on the subject of restructuring, we have today over $9.2 trillion that we owe to other countries and individuals. That is $30,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country. It's irresponsible. And more than that, it gets at our ability to invest in other growth vehicles in the future. Now, we've seen this number increase through deficit after deficit under this administration, and that's something that has to change. We've gone back to the pay-go rules that say if you offer a bill that increases spending, you must find a way to pay for it. And I think that's a good first step. But we need to be serious about this and actually demand a balanced budget going forward. Otherwise, we're just going to keep digging ourselves deeper and deeper into this hole. And with things like Social Security coming, we simply don't have the luxury of doing that. So getting out of debt is going to be fundamental. One of the investments that I think should lead with our new dollars is that of energy. Today, we subsidize the oil companies, the wealthiest companies in our nation's history, with billions of tax dollars. Billions of tax dollars. Why not pull those tax dollars and put them towards researching alternative fuels and technologies? Doing so does three things for us. Look, number one, it creates jobs right here. My old company, GE, is doing quite well with its eco-imagination pitch. They're selling environmentally sensitive products and technologies overseas. Not because they care about the environment, quite honestly, but because there's money to be made there. And there are jobs to be developed here in doing so. Two, it's the right thing to do for the environment. We all know that global warming, whatever you feel the cause of it is, continues to be a threat, and if we don't take action soon, we're not going to see a reverse in the trending that we're seeing. Three, it lessens our dependence on oil. And I mentioned earlier, the cost of a barrel of oil, crude, hit $135 recently, which is a record increase in that amount of time to go from, I believe it was $30 in 2001. That's incredible growth. We can't keep speeding down a dead-end road. We've got to find other alternatives to pursue, and this is something that's going to be good for our policies as well. Education, I alluded to that earlier. The fact is today, a college degree is what a high school degree was for a previous generation. We need to get more people into higher education, whether that be college or technical degrees. And I think further, we need to build up our system of community colleges because in a knowledge-based economy, education can't be something that you pursue just in the first quarter of your life. Workers need to have a place to go where they can revisit skills, change skills, sharpen skills so that we can stay competitive. It's something that we should have been working on years ago, but it's not too late to deal with. And it's funny, as I talk to a lot of my interns and talk to a lot of young people, the fact is they're coming out of school with thousands of dollars of debt. Estimates range anywhere from $20,000 to $35,000 for a new graduate. At the same time, they're facing more competition today than I faced when I came out of college, and certainly more than my parents faced when they came out. So we're not doing right by them. And having policies that are going to encourage them to do that, and of course the funding to go along with it, is a big deal and an important part of what it will take to be successful. Because these are, after all, going to be the workers of the future. The last point I want to make is actually about employing these workers. And that gets back to R&D and technology. We have seen both publicly and privately the amount of funding going to R&D drop off. Now, I think this is dangerous. It's not just for things like NIH, it's for basic science, but also for things that could provide or help build our economy in the future. We want to fund these things again. And again, this is all in the context of a deficit. We're going to have to figure out where that money is going to come from. But in the long term, we've got to build these things up because that's how we're going to employ people and keep our competitive edge in the future. In the long run, it's going to be those productivity gains that allow us to have our edge and keep our edge going forward. So I'd like to see, for example, the R&D tax credit not be up for renewal every 18 months, but see it extended. Why not even make it permanent? This is a sort of policy that is pro-growth and will help our companies to invest and build, and that's exactly what we want them to do. In closing, before we go to questions, I don't want to just cast a huge shadow over our economy. There are some things that are worth pointing out that are going well and that we can build on. Our GDP is still the largest in the world. It dwarfs any other economy. We know that Americans are living longer and healthier lives than they ever have, and we know that worker productivity is up. These are wonderful things, and the productivity gains we've made over the last 20 years have helped us to have a shallower recession period as we sort of get smarter with reading the economic indicators. And while these are all great things, the fact is they can be so much better. We have so much more that we have to do because markets are dynamic and the competition is dynamic. And if we can't continue to keep ahead of the curve, we will fall behind it. And I don't think that's good for any of us. So I thank you again for having me here and for hearing my thoughts on it. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Okay, Dan, this is going to be rapid fire.
Where do you want me to be?
Right by the microphone.
All right.
They've heard me plenty. This comes from a fellow who should know about this, but we'll ask anyways. Former, still Congressman Mikva to me. The rest, all those other titles, I still remember the battles of '66 and '68. From Congressman Mikva, tell us about the makeup of your district and what happened last time.
I was going to stay
Make
away
that
from
last part
that.
quick.
All right, all right. So the district runs from Wilmette to Palatine, up to Libertyville, over to Waukegan and back down. It's often thought of as being an area of very affluent people, but the fact is there's a lot of diversity, economic and otherwise, in the district. Last time I ran, I was an upstart candidate. I was not picked by the national party to run. But I started going door to door, and we had a grassroots campaign, had 2,600 volunteers come out, raised just under $2 million, and won 47% of the vote. And we did that all with the help of our friends and through a lot of hard work. And we're very proud of that. I could be about 3 points more proud of that, though. Yeah.
From Joyce Saxon, member of the board, what segment of voters is your strongest base?
People who want change. I mean, I don't mean to sound flip, but there are, in every group that I talk to, folks have had enough. It's not about just, folks who live in one geography or who look a certain way. Folks are looking for a different course, and that's what I'm arguing for.
Okay. Like a true professor, very snappy answers. All right. This comes from Brian. What is your plan to address the aging and crumbling infrastructure of this state and the country? Are we talking about roads, I would assume?
And transit.
And transit.
Absolutely.
Okay, because they're together closely. Thank you.
Well, and this is a big issue. In my area, you talk about transit. The commutes are awful. In fact, anywhere in my district, the commutes are awful. We have some tough choices ahead of us when you are running these huge deficits and are $9.2, now $3 trillion in debt. But the fact is, if you don't have your infrastructure, you don't have economic growth. And so this is one of the things that has to be prioritized on our spending side. The challenge is going to be, where do we take money from to achieve that? And so, like I said, it's always easy, takes no leadership to borrow more money and spend it. We're going to have to look at where we're going to divert funds from. One area where I think we should be looking is the subject of agricultural subsidies. Not to the small family farmer, but to the wealthy one. The folks who are making $500,000 a year and are still getting subsidized or have homes in Manhattan. These are the folks who don't need government tax dollars. So we need to look at places where there is wasteful spending or spending where we're not getting a substantial return and divert it to the essentials like infrastructure.
This should be relatively easy. What do you think is the biggest difference between you and Congressman Kirk, other than the fact that he's an incumbent?
See, I had no plan to even talk about him today, but you've asked me directly. The basic difference between us is our support for the current course. He has been lifetime voting almost 90% with George Bush and the Republican Party, and I would not be, very clearly. And so on issues like the war, by voting for the budgets that have created the deficits, the cut to veterans benefits, these are all issues where I have disagreements with the congressman, and I'm going to keep talking about those issues.
Okay. Now we'll get a little more hardball.
Okay.
But I won't scream. This is from Ed Mazer, board member. Where do you live, and when will you move into the district?
I live in Wilmette, and my little slice of Wilmette was gerrymandered out after the last census was taken. So, you know, if the biggest issue for you is that I live a block and a half south of Lake Avenue, then I may not be your guy. But if you care about the war, if you care about the deficits, and all those other issues that we've talked about, which is where I think the real differences are, I think you've got to vote for change.
From Jill Zwick. How does your position on Israel differ from your opponent's position, and what do you support for the resolution of Jerusalem?
The only difference that I can see, and you know, the congressman has been a strong supporter of Israel, I think, because it's the right thing to do. It should never be controversial to be against the random missiling of innocents in Israel. Literally thousands of missiles are falling on Israel each day. And so I feel very strongly about supporting Israel as well. If there's a difference, I think it goes back to that war in Iraq, which I don't think does any service to Israel and frankly destabilizing the Middle East and giving Iran a stronger hand. But I would like to think that if he had to do it over again, he would. We'll have to ask him.
This is probably the toughest question you're going to get, perhaps the toughest question of the campaign. You could take a pass on this one if you like. What can the Illinois Congressional Delegation, we'll say, do to break the logjam in state government so more federal dollars come back for roads, education, etc.? Now, you can take a pass on that.
Listen, I am not from Springfield, don't want to go to Springfield. I don't know what's going on down there, and I think it'd be nice to have some adults there who would actually work for the people that they're supposed to represent.
Not a bad answer, given the fact that there's no good one. All right. This is from Chris Roebling, the star of early morning television. Please name some of your clients. Now, I don't think you have to do that, but if you want to, go ahead.
I focus on small business. I think probably one of the more prominent ones that people already know, and prominent I put in quotes, is thepoint.com, which is a website that basically tries to help people self-organize. It's part of the social network technology that's out there. But my consulting has obviously dropped off tremendously as I have been running for office.
Once elected, what will be the first bill you introduce? I'll leave the second part out. First bill you're going to try and introduce.
Well, I don't know why we would just want to stay with one. There's so much to do. Look, we've got to get out of the war in Iraq. We spent over $500 billion there. I support a phased withdrawal. That is going to be sort of the finger in our eye for all the other issues until we can address it. Healthcare, I mentioned that earlier today, is an urgent issue. We need to have reform. We've got to start the debates and the processes. I'd like to be able to offer something there. And energy policy. There are very few policies where you can affect so many different components of our country. Energy policy is front and center. I mentioned the economy, the environment, and our national security. We need to make moves there as well. I'd be ecstatic to pass bills in any three or any one of those areas if I could.
Do you see a role for the federal government, particularly in the U.S. Congress, in the continued reconstruction of New Orleans?
Well, I do. I mean, listen, if we had the government that we deserved, our FEMA director would have moved to New Orleans and said, I'm not leaving until the job is finished. That's not what happened. The government does have a role. It's in all of our interest, economically and I think morally, to help them get back on their feet. Government can't do everything. I've never been of the school that says that government is the one and only solution. Far from it. But to the extent that we can have policies that encourage growth, I think that's a good thing.
Wow. This is the last question, and it's a long one. Both sides. Ted Swank, figure. Ted, congratulations. You win the longest question award. When Duval Patrick kicked off his campaign for governor of this is sort of like a little story, of Massachusetts, his guest speaker was Senator Obama. Pointed out that if you're African American, graduated from Harvard Law School, and have a funny first name, you can sure get elected. Dad Dan, why can't you get a more exotic first name? Who says we don't hit the hard questions?
I'm not sure how to respond to that.
I don't blame you.
I will say this, I'm very excited that the junior senator from Illinois is the Democratic nominee. I think he is fighting for exactly the right things, not just to change the policies that our government has been pursuing, but to actually reform the government itself. I don't think we're going to get any of the things that I've been talking about today and that I presume you have been thinking about unless we change the actual way that Washington works. I think it's fundamental to any sort of success that we're going to have going forward.
That's it. How about a big round of applause? Wow. We got the usual Holy Trinity, the coffee mug, the one-year membership, and the history of the City Club of Chicago. Congratulations. Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Adjourned.